Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Living Room Lecture Series with Historic Locust Grove. We're so pleased you're with us today. My name is Hannah Zimmerman, and I am the Marketing and Communications Director at Historic Locust Grove. I'm so happy to see all of your faces. I'm going to ask everyone to keep their microphones muted during the program, but you're welcome to keep your video camera turned on. We do miss seeing the faces of our friends in person, so seeing them over Zoom is the next best thing. If you have any questions for our speaker, James Prichard of the Filson Historical Society, I will ask you to leave those in the chat or email them to me at marketing@locustgrove.org. We're delighted to have you with us today. And just to compound upon our delight, I'm going to introduce our Executive Director, Dr. Carol Ely, to say a few words. Take it away, Carol.
All right, well, I'm required to be delightful. Congratulations to everybody who managed to cheer themselves away from constantly refreshing election maps to think about history. It's sometimes good to take the long view of American history, and a day of a little bit of murder and mayhem sounds just the refreshment that we need today. You may have noticed from some of the messages that Hannah has sent out lately that we have reduced our hours somewhat. We are now open Thursday through Saturday, and we are not at the moment giving in-person tours of the historic house because Jefferson County is considered to be a red zone and the danger has gone up. We are we thought it prudent to eliminate that from our schedule, but we are giving virtual tours, we are giving grounds tours. There are many options that you can find on our website and in our emails. And we are still planning to continue with our usual museum store sale that we do from Thanksgiving for a little way into December. And a book sale is coming the first 2 weekends of December. So continue to watch our emails every Friday at least from Hannah, and that will tell you what's going on. So glad you joined us. I'm really looking forward to thinking about the frontier and murder and mayhem. So take it away, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Carol. I will just pivot off of what Carol said and remind everyone to visit our website, www.locustgrove.org, to stay tuned to all of the latest on our hours. And we give virtual tours every Tuesday at 11. So if you have never taken a virtual tour of Locust Grove, or you just really miss being in the house and you want to see it, sign up on Tuesdays at 11. It's free for members. And again, keep checking your emails. We send them out every Friday evening, and that's the best way to stay in touch. And that's also the best way to find out about our next living room lecture. But focusing on today's lecture with James Prichard of the Filson. James, are you ready to be introduced?
Yes.
All right, here we go. James Prichard received his BA and MA in history from Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. He supervised the Kentucky State Archives Research Room from 1985 to 2008 and currently works as the cataloger for special collections at the Filson Historical Society since 2013. In 1999, he was a member of Kentucky Governor Paul Patton's Underground Railroad Advisory Committee, participated in the KET documentary Kentucky's Underground Railroad Passage to Freedom, and authored Into the Fiery Furnace, Anti-Slavery Prisoners in the Kentucky State Penitentiary, 1844 to 1870. Jim has delivered papers on the Civil War era and the Underground Railroad at several scholarly conferences and symposiums during his tenure with the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. He's also published several book reviews in the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society, the Filson Quarterly, and other journals. He's contributed biographical entries and historical essays to several works, including, but not limited to, the Kentucky Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Louisville, the World Encyclopedia of Slavery, Heidler's Encyclopedia of the American Civil War, and Kentuckians in Gray. He's also published articles in the Civil War Times, North and South, and True West magazines. He's the author of Embattled Capital, Frankfort, Kentucky in the Civil War, published in 2014, and is currently preparing for publication on a book-length study on Kentucky pioneer Colonel William Whitley. Welcome to James Prichard of the Filson. Take it away, Jim.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation from Locust Grove and the opportunity to visit with everyone today. You know, as I've shared when I've given this talk in the past, this tale is quite fitting, considering that we just barely squeezed past the Halloween observations. And I'm not particularly fond of slasher movies, but this particular story is pretty violent and pretty gruesome. So I wanted to, I wanted to get that disclaimer out right off the back. The Harps are largely forgotten today. Other brothers stole the limelight from them, like Frank and Jesse James in the annals of crime. But in the early 19th century in America, particularly in Kentucky, they were well remembered. And as we'll find out in the next few minutes, that's for obvious reasons. They were brutal, merciless, and cunning. You could almost call them shapeshifters, because if you encountered them on some lonely bridle path or on the wilderness road, they could be poor, struggling pilgrims setting out to make a new life for themselves in Kentucky, or pious Methodist circuit riders, or they might even be vigilantes that are in pursuit of the Harps. And it almost reflects Native American styles of warfare in the sense that you always attacked when your target was least expecting it. So that's something to keep in mind as we tell the stories of the Harps. Two brothers believed to be from North Carolina, who grew up and may have participated in the American Revolution on the Tory side. Now, when I was in school, I was taught that after the Revolution, most of the Tories, went back to England. They went to Nova Scotia. They went to Canada. But what a lot of people don't realize is many, many hundreds, if not thousands, went west. Many of those in the South took refuge in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, Cumberland Mountains, during the Revolution, and then from their mountain hideouts, they would raid the settlements. And this may have been most likely what happened to the Harps. A lot of Tories also took refuge with the Cherokees and the Creeks and were welcomed in their towns and joined them on their raids against the American settlements during the Revolution. And Lyman Draper, who's a noted scholar of the frontier era, interviewed a lot of pioneers in the early 19th century. He did find some accounts that claimed that the Hart brothers, Micajah, known as Big Harp, and Wiley, known as Little Harp, were riding with the Cherokees during the post-revolutionary Indian Wars in the South. In the spring of 1794, they were with the Cherokee chief Doublehead, who attacked a party of travelers, most of them men of the cloth, on the Wilderness Road north of Cumberland Gap, and wiped this party out. It was known to the settlers as the Minister's Defeat, and the Harps were involved in that. They were also believed to be with Creek allies of the Chickamauga, who attacked another band of travelers north of Nashville on the Red River and wiped out that large group of travelers in the fall of 1794. Now, I suspect that they learned their fighting ways and stealth and skills while with Native Americans. And I'm rather fond of the Cherokee because they had such interesting names for their chiefs and warriors. I mentioned Doublehead. There's also Bloody Fellow, Pumpkin Boy, Captain Binge, The Glass, The Breath. Doublehead was with the party that killed a man in the Barrens. And the Indians were so impressed with his bravery that they cooked and ate this particular frontiersman. But afterwards, Doublehead supposedly related that that was the last white man that he was ever going to eat because white people were too salty. So the Indian Wars come to an end in 1796, and lo and behold, in 1797, the Hart brothers, claiming they had come up from Georgia, settled in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this sets the stage for where this is all acted out. If you could imagine the region from Knoxville to Cumberland Gap to London, Kentucky, and then westward to Bowling Green, and then down the Green River Valley to Henderson, that'll give you a good idea of their area of operations. They buy a small farm, put in a crop. Little Hart Whitley marries the daughter of a Methodist minister, Sarah Rice, in June of 1797. And Micajah Big Hart married Susanna Roberts that fall. Now this illustrates in a way that there's a little good in everyone, even somebody like Big Hart. You see, Susanna's sister, Betsy, was terribly in love with Big Hart, but Big Hart married her sister. So out of the kindness of his heart, Big Hart took both women into his household. And so both sisters shared bed and board with Big Hart. We need to bring back some of those traditional pioneer family values, I'd say. In Knoxville, which at that time was the capital of Tennessee, they engaged in typical pursuits, horse racing, gambling. They supposedly began to lose heavily and incur a lot of gambling debts. So they picked up their old practice of horse stealing. They were caught, arrested, and were being taken back to Knoxville for trial when they escaped. And their wives later stated that they were so enraged by this arrest. And of course, at that time, horse stealing was a capital offense, that they declared war on civilization. So they gathered up their women, disappeared into East Tennessee, and skulked around Knoxville for several weeks, stealing horses, committing acts of arson. They tried to set fire to the governor's mansion one night. The militia would always pursue them, and they would always disappear into the hills. So by late 1798, they had evidently stolen enough horses, gathered enough plunder to start on a new life in Kentucky. So they leave East Tennessee, they pick up the Cumberland Trail, they encounter a lone peddler on the trail, or I should say by this time it's actually Wilderness Road, and murder him and rob him. They encounter two travelers from Maryland and murdered them and robbed them. Their bodies were found sometime much later. They also met a young man from Mecklenburg County, Virginia, by the name of Thomas Langford. He's traveling to Kentucky. He's fairly well-to-do and carrying quite a bit of gold. And the Harps befriend him. This is dangerous country. You shouldn't be traveling alone. Join our party, and we'll all watch out for each other. So they reach Ferris Tavern in present-day Lincoln County, Kentucky, in December of 1798. And they spend the night, Langford, the Harps, and their women. The following morning, the Harps rose early and had their breakfast. And they began to squabble with Mrs. Ferris over what she was charging for the meal. And so Langford joins them, and he says, I hate to, we're paraphrasing here, of course, I hate to see such squabbling, at mealtime. He says, I'll pay for the breakfast. He says, with as much gold as I've got, I could easily pay for this. Well, he signed his own death warrant. A few days later, some drovers were coming back south toward Cumberland Gap, and one of their horses began to behave suspiciously. They found some bloodstains along the road, followed into the woods, and they found Langford's body covered over with leaves and dead logs. And I've actually seen the coroner's report, and poor Langford was dispatched with a shattering tomahawk blow to the side of his head. And this is something, again, from our Filson collection, and that would have been typical for all men in that era on the frontier to not only have their long rifle, but their scalping knife and their tomahawk. So Devil Joe Ballinger, he was a forgotten frontiersman that was well known in those days. He raises a posse, they set out in pursuit. They overtake the Harp and their women and capture them on Christmas Day. Bring them back to Lincoln County, where they're indicted for murder under the alias they were using of Wiley and McCodger Roberts. And then they're taken to Danville to be tried in spring in the district court. During that winter, in early 1799, all three Harp women give birth to children, 2 girls and a boy. Now, on March 16th, 1799, the Hart brothers break out of jail, leaving their women and their children and flee into the wilderness. And once again, Devil Joe Ballinger is in pursuit. And this is what's fascinating about the Harps. They had such a ferocious appearance, such an aura of menace and evil, that at one point, the posse, which outnumbered the 2 brothers, overtook them. And instead of hiding, the Harps stood their ground, dared the posse to fight, and then glared at them. And the posse refused to go after them. So they finally get their nerve. They go out in pursuit again. This time the Harps disappear into a canebrake. Nobody would want to pursue anyone in an old-fashioned Kentucky canebrake. It would be a thick, dense thicket, possibly 8 to 10 feet high, if not more. So the Harps were able to elude this group of pursuers. And shortly afterwards, near Columbia, Kentucky, they came upon little Johnny Trubeau, who was 12, carrying a sack of flour on the way to the mill. They murdered him, dismembered him, and his dismembered body was shortly afterwards found in a sinkhole. They continue westward, heading toward Bowling Green and the Green River country. And somewhere near Bowling Green, they murdered Frederick Stump and threw his body in the Green River. This was another technique that will probably account for why we will never know just how many people the Harps did away with. What they would do, if they had time, would be to disembowel their victim, fill the stomach cavity with rocks, and sink it in a river. And that's exactly how Stump's body was found on April of 1799. And I was able to I've seen the original coroner reports for the murder of Thomas Langford, and I've also seen Stump's. And it described, again, about a knife slash crosswise across the stomach. And of course, his throat had been cut and his rifle had been stolen. They kill another man named Dooley near Edmonston, and then they disappear into what was the wild frontier of Kentucky at that time, the area of Muhlenberg, Henderson, and Hopkins County. And here we lose sight of them. According to some accounts, they took refuge with the river pirates at Caven Rock, Illinois, just across the river from Kentucky, and may have committed some murders in Illinois proper. Now, according to legend, the land pirates there, the river pirates, I should say, were so disgusted by the Harps' brutality that they cast them out. And according to one story, the pirates and the Harps captured a group of people traveling on a raft down the Ohio River, and they were celebrating over their plunder and prisoners. And the Harps took one young man and tied him to a horse and then drove the horse off a cliff into the base of the entrance of the cave. And this is what caused them to be exiled from the river pirates. So the Harps make their way to the Chickasaw country in western Kentucky, then back through central Tennessee, all the way back to the Knoxville region. And in July, bodies began to turn up all over the place. One Hardin was found dead in the Holston River in the middle of July. One Bradbury was found dead and murdered near Kingston the same month. On July 25th of 1799, they encountered 15-year-old Isaac Coffey and dashed out his brains so they could steal his shoes and his rifle. William Ballard was murdered near Knoxville, gutted and sunk in the Holston River. And now they're heading back toward Kentucky. They're heading to a portion of Kentucky just west of Cumberland Gap. And en route, they encounter two brothers from South Carolina, James and Robert Brazel, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. "What's the news?" the brothers asked the Harps. "Oh, haven't you heard? The terrible Harps are back in the area, and they've been murdering people right and left around Knoxville. We're in pursuit of them for the reward." And I should add, by this time, the governor of Kentucky had put $300 on each of the heads of the Hart brothers, and the citizens of Knoxville had offered an additional $450 reward. So the Harps, posing as law and order men, ingratiate themselves with the Brazel brothers, earn their confidence and trust, and then they seize both the brothers. Robert is able to make his escape. He continues back down the trail. He runs into another party of immigrants. He says, "Outlaws have got my brother a prisoner. Please help me rescue him." They go back to the scene of the conflict. They find James dead with his throat slashed. So they set out in pursuit. Now, I should add that in the spring of '99, the Harp women and their infants were set free in Danville under the belief, as they led their captors to believe, that they were going to go back and rejoin their families in Tennessee and have nothing more to do with their husbands. But instead, they made their way west and linked up with their husbands. And so now they were traveling again with them in the Kentucky borderland, Kentucky-Tennessee borderland. So Brazel and his reinforcements overtake them. And once again, the Hart brothers fix that wolfish glare onto their pursuers, and the posse turned back. They refused to have anything more to do with the pursuit of the brothers. And so they make their way back to the Green River country. They establish a camp near the Salt Licks near Dixon, present-day Webster County. And they hover around the Salt Licks for several days. The reason why is that there were frequent groups of men or solitary travelers to the Salt Licks to get a supply of salt. So they became easy prey, and they committed several more murders around the Salt Licks. But probably the most dastardly deed took place on the night of August 2nd, 1799, in present-day Webster County. They appeared outside the cabin of Moses Stiegel, who was away at that time. But Mrs. Stiegel, with an infant in the cradle, and a lodger, Major Thomas Love, were present. The Harps were Bible-carrying, pious Methodist circuit riders, weary from spreading the gospel, and just needed a roof over their heads for the night. And so I suspect the women were downstairs with the missus and the baby, and the men were up in the loft with Major Love. And according to tradition, Major Love snored long and loudly all that night. And one of the Harts became so disgusted because he wasn't able to sleep that he went over and tomahawked Love quietly but fatally while he slept. The next morning, while Mrs. Stiegel was making breakfast, according to tradition, the Hart brothers were rocking the cradle. And she says, "You are awfully good with children. That child has not made a peep." Well, the child was dead. And soon Mrs. Stiegel was dead. And soon the cabin was plundered and set on fire. And according to an account collected by Lyman Draper, they even threw the Stiegel's dogs into the cabin. And as the dogs began to howl, the Harts reportedly laughed and said, "They smell hell, don't they?" So they began to set themselves southward toward Pond River in what's now Muhlenberg County. And shortly afterwards, a posse of about a half a dozen men, including Moses Stiegel, sets out in pursuit. So at a place still called Harps Hill, in Muhlenberg County, the Harps were overtaken. They were caught in the act of murdering another person, but fortunately that individual was able to escape in the noise and the confusion, and so was Little Harp. He abandoned his wife and child and took to the brush. Big Harp grabbed one of his women, put her on a horse and tried to make his escape, but then he pushed her off at one point and continued to ride on alone when a frontiersman named John Leeper rode up behind him and shot him with a rifle. The bullet lodged in the lower part of his back and into his spine. And Harp, who was wielding a tomahawk at that time, fell from his horse to the ground. He was still alive. So the pursuers gathered all around him and made him confess his crimes. And one thing I omitted in their flight from the Bowling Green area up the Green River area, one of the infant children of Big Harp kept crying. And Harp was afraid that they would be detected. And so he murdered his own infant child. And he claimed that he was responsible for over 18 killings, but the murder of his own child was the only one that he regretted. Now, according to legend and lore, the types of stories that would be told around the fireplaces in Kentucky for generations, Moses Stiegel got enough of Harp's talk. So he pulled out his hunting knife. And he says, "See this?" He says, "I'm going to take your head." And so Harp supposedly was still alive when Stiegel began to decapitate him. And according to tradition, Harp said, "Cut, cut, you're a damn rough butcher." And so they sever his head, put it in a saddlebag, and set back out for Henderson. It's August, and the heat is soon taking its toll. So when they get near Dixon in Webster County, they find a huge forked tree at a crossroads. And so they place the severed head in the fork of that tree as a warning to other evildoers that might pass along. And for years afterwards, at a spot still known as Harps Head, people would pass the grinning skull of Big Harp as they traveled along that country roadside. And according to tradition, a conjuring woman later took that skull, pounded it into dust, and used it for some type of spell that she was casting. And then many years later in the 1870s, lightning finally struck that tree and it burned away. So that was the end of Big Harp. What happened to Little Harp? Well, he went to the Mississippi Territory and became a land pirate on the Natchez Trace, was captured and hanged in Mississippi in 1804. And as for the Harp women and their children, they were taken back to Henderson, charged with accessories in the murder of Mrs. Stiegel in Love, and then taken to Logan County, Russellville, for trial, where they were acquitted. And they lived for several years in Logan County thereafter. As a matter of fact, Sally Rice Harp, Little Harp's wife, was the only one to really leave Logan County. She went back to her Methodist minister father near Knoxville, rejoined the family with her infant child, later remarried and supposedly moved to Illinois. Susanna Roberts Harp, the legal wife of Big Harp, remarried in Logan County and would also move to Illinois. Betsy, Big Harp's concubine, would live out her years in Logan County and would die there. And so the Harp saga comes to a close. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Hannah, I should say this. I was running a little bit behind, and I left my glasses on the seat of my car. So I might not be able to read any messages.
I have got you covered. I am going to read the questions to you. Everyone, if you have questions for Jim, please do leave them in the comments. But you gave a disclaimer at the top of your talk, and I was still unprepared for the gruesome details of the Hart Brothers. I guess a first question that I have before we get into some details is, how, as a Kentucky native, have I never heard of the Hart Brothers? They're like the Jack the Rippers of Kentucky, but until you and I started speaking about this program, I had never heard of them. So,
their
how
members
did you find out?
Well, in the like in the Muhlenberg County area, in the Webster County area. Again, they have Harps Hill, where they were finally overtaken, Harps Head. And there were constant articles about them in Kentucky newspapers and really in American newspapers in the 19th century. But, it's one of these types of things where, like Frank and Jesse James and the Wild West Outlaws captured the public imagination, the dime novels, stage plays, eventually silent movies and talkies. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And I should add, again, and I try to prepare everyone, in some ways, these men didn't stick out in terms of their brutality. That gives you an idea the way warfare was engaged in on the frontier, particularly against Native Americans. It was, swift, certain, and brutal. And neither side expected to be taken prisoner. And so I think what really frightened people of the frontier in Kentucky was that the Harps used Native American warfare against, quote, their own kind. Okay. They attacked with stealth and butchered people of all ages and both genders, and without mercy. So that was very typical of warfare in the Revolutionary South, in the western part of the Carolinas and Virginia, and East Tennessee, and the Kentucky frontier. So a lot of the most startling thing, I think, to their generation was that they murdered women and even infants. And of course, there are some accounts that they murdered a little African-American enslaved girl too, about the time that little Johnny Tribune was butchered. But yeah, it was an exceedingly dangerous, brutal time to be alive in Kentucky.
Yeah, so to answer, our executive director, Carol, asked the question, how common was this kind of violence, which you just kind of answered, is this kind of violence was pretty common, but as you said, it was unusual for it to be inflicted on like kind of frontiersmen to settler. It was often, yes, kind of othered, but yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, I was reading in Collins' History of Kentucky an interview. This will be the edition, I think, that was published in the 1850s, of a pioneer woman. And she said, once the Indian Wars ended, that's when the bad men began to come into Kentucky. And so you had Tory exiles, horse thieves, outlaws hovered along the southern frontier well before the Revolution, breaking into homes, stores, stealing horses, and stealing women. They would, ride into someone's home and steal their daughters to take back, to their camps. And I read an account where Daniel Boone was part of a posse in the Yadkin River region of North Carolina after some outlaws that had stolen a young woman.
Oh, wow.
To take off to their hideaway. So that kind of crime was existed long before the Harps came along.
A question from one of our audience members as well, because I lost track. How many people are they on record as murdering? I think I lost count about 5.
Yeah, about 25, I'd say. The Big Harp claimed 18. Now, of course, we don't know what Little Harp would have boasted or confessed to. But one of the most interesting stories is that they ran across a Methodist circuit rider in East Tennessee when they had just left Knoxville. and they robbed him at his camp at night, and they were apparently literate. Big Heart picked up his Bible and looked at it, and he also found something in the minister's saddlebag that had a picture of George Washington. And he says, General Washington, he says, he was a brave man, but a mighty rebel against the king. And then he cast the image back down on the ground. But they spared this minister, and I'm not sure exactly why. That's quite unusual for them. And they even shouted, "We are the Harps," as they rode out of sight into the night. So that was one lucky gentleman that they spared at that time.
And I guess it's so interesting to think of them as Tories in the 1790s, you know, about 10 years after the war ended. Another question from one of our audience members: what do you think caused them to want to commit these murders or acts of violence? Do you think it was pure mania, or do you think it was caused by their Tory leanings? They were just kind of political zealots, let's say.
It's really, that's a good question. It's a tough question. I do know from interviews with the women after they were in the Russellville jail that they said that both brothers felt like they were outcasts from society and that they were at war with society. And I think that, again, who knows what type of childhood they had, who knows what type of mental health issues they had. But I think the fact that they were with the Cherokees and the Creeks in the sort of the Muscle Shoals, Alabama, Chattanooga area, and raiding into East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, Kentucky, and the Nashville area for years and years and years, from 1783 to 1795. I think they became pretty used to the sight of blood and to killing. And if you were attacked by Doublehead and his warriors, or Bloody Fellow on the Wilderness Trail, they would surprise you at dawn or at night, and they would kill men, women, free enslaved African Americans, infants, the elderly, and then whoever they spared, they would take back to their towns around Chattanooga. And if you had trouble keeping up, if you were sickly or elderly, or if you were a mother who had just given birth and you had trouble keeping up, they would tomahawk you and leave you dead along the trail. So that was very typical of warfare between the settlers and the tribes in the South, and of course the tribes north of the Ohio River as well.
It's so interesting because we think of Kentucky as kind of the first bastion of civilization in the West, but it's really interesting to hear that it was kind of outrageously wild. You know, when the Clarks and the Crons came to Kentucky in the 1780s and 1790s, the people who lived at Locust Grove, George Rogers Clark convinced his whole family to move to Kentucky from near Charlottesville, Virginia, which is relatively settled. And your story has really put it in context for me of, oh my gosh, he was asking them to literally just like walk into the complete wild unknown. Even though Louisville had been settled for several years, it was what an insane story. I'm so glad to know about the Harps now. But how did you become interested in them, and what sort of original records are still out there about the Hart Brothers? What primary sources have you used in your research?
I first became interested in them when I was reading an article in a historical magazine in a dentist's office.
Oh.
And it piqued my interest. And then, of course, later, I was, of course, a native of Dayton, Ohio at the time, and Alan Eckert was a very popular author in the 70s and 80s, I'm sure still is today, who wrote a lot of books on the frontier. And so I became interested in frontier history. And then when I worked at the archives and decided to do talks for the Humanities Council on the harps, I began to go through the actual court records that are stored there. So I was able to go through, like the original Lincoln County indictments, the statements of people that were on the jury. In other words, I'm trying to think of the correct term. In Kentucky's jury system. In other words, they listen to the prosecutor and then decide whether there's enough evidence to hand down.
The grand jury?
That's it, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Hand down an indictment. So there were statements from them. There were statements about Langford's body and what the death wounds were. And I found similar records in Henderson. And then we had on microfilm the Warren County clerk order books that had Stump's autopsy report or coroner's report entered into it that described the condition of his body. And then, of course, with today with newspapers.com, I was able to scour contemporary news articles and then all the way up into the early 20th century. And that's how I found out about the tree at Harps Head being struck by lightning in the 1870s, because a local resident, reported that to the Courier-Journal. So occasionally there would be articles about them that had some, more interesting details.
I'm never going to be able to think about the Green River the same. Jeffrey, who is our groundskeeper, camps there quite a bit, so he'll have to be on the lookout for for that. But how old were the Hart brothers when they died?
They were born around 1760.
Okay.
So they were in their 30s. So they could have actually fought in the Revolution even at the age of like 11 or 12 or 13. That wasn't unusual.
Right.
So that would be sort of around their generation. And we think about the frontier, but it's chillingly modern in a way. That a lot of people call them America's first serial killers, but I think of them as spree killers. In other words, the old classic dead men tell no tales. If you don't have a witness, you don't have a trial. And so it's a cautionary tale. I was walking down Bardstown Road late one night, and a young woman came up beside me and asked if she could walk along with me. It was very dark, very cold. And there weren't that many people out on the streets. And so she trustingly walked along with me. And I have two daughters, and I thought, she is awfully trusting, And so when it came time for me to turn off to the street where I live, I said, young lady, I'm not trying to startle you, but be careful who you walk up to on a dark street at night. Not everyone is who they appear to be, or who they appear to be. So if the Harps taught me anything, like I said, if they could pull off being pious ministers at the dinner table,
right?
There are a lot of dangerous people out there.
They certainly fooled a lot of people. They got away with it for a lot longer than one would think. Do you have any final thoughts besides giving us the opportunity to be reminded that we should not trust everyone we see in the world as much as we wish we could always trust everyone? Do you have any other final thoughts on the Hart brothers or your upcoming project on William Whitley?
I'm really interested in William Whitley. You mentioned George Rogers Clark. Whitley was a native of Augusta County. He was born in 1749, came to Kentucky in 1775. And it's not a popular term today, but he gained quite a reputation as an Indian fighter. He wasn't really active in political leadership, but he served with Clark at the beginning of the Illinois expedition, the various punitive expeditions against the Shawnee in Ohio during the Revolution. And of course, he lived near the Wilderness Trace, later the Wilderness Road, after it was improved in the 1790s. And he was sort of regarded as the guardian of the trace. And if there was an Indian attack on settlers, he was an officer in the Lincoln County Militia. He would gather his men together and go drive off, usually Cherokees or Creeks. And he became quite well known to the Cherokees and quite notorious among them. And in all, he claimed to have taken 13 scalps. And the last scalp that he took was at the Battle of the Thames in Canada during the War of 1812, where he was killed at the battle there in 1813. And what's interesting about his story is that some Indian accounts, Native American accounts, I should say, claim that he was killed by Tecumseh.
Oh.
And then some accounts by Kentuckians claim that Whitley was the man who killed Tecumseh. And he was at that time 63 or 64 years old, Whitley was, and was still able to, actively participate in the Indian Wars. Now, his 13 scalps were nothing compared to Captain Binge of the Cherokees. He was actually 3/4 white, but at the time of his death in 1794, Cherokee historians claim that he had taken over 45 scalps. So again, that was how a warrior gained stature, by the number of hair he took, the number of horses, and the number of captives. Those were all war trophies.
Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about William Whitley. But I do have one final question. If someone were interested in learning more about river pirates along the Ohio, what are some sources you would point them to?
You know, the best book out there, if you can see this, actually, it's kind of blurry on the screen.
The Outlaws of Cave and Rock.
The author was Otto Rothert, Rothert, and it's called The Outlaws of Cave and Rock. And it was written quite some time ago. There hasn't been anything I'm aware of on the river pirates written since the 1950s. I believe Rothert's book dates from the 1930s, but it's still one of the best sources on the river pirates and also the harps, because the author, who was a member of the Filson Club staff until he died in the 1950s, visited early courthouses and had access to records that no longer exist. I wasn't able to find some of the court records in Henderson that he copied verbatim, so I'm glad that he was able to salvage those records. But that would be one of the best river pirate sources. And I believe we're still, well, of course, we do lookups via email.
Okay.
So anyone here, anyone who you encounter that's interested in what we might have at the Filson, send me an email. I'm on the staff email roster listing, and I'd be happy to do some digging for you.
I just put Jim's email in the chat, everyone. So if you have a research question for Jim, it's jprichard@filsonhistorical.org. Jim, the topic has not been pleasant, but having you with us today has been such a pleasure. We're so pleased that you were able to join us. And everyone, our next lecture will be on December 9th. We will be hosting Bruce Richardson of the Elmwood Inn Tea Company. So we're so pleased to have him join us, and then we will see you in the new year. But please stay tuned. Our living room lectures are going to continue for as long as we're not able to hold in-person events. And we're continuing to do as many other virtual online things as we possibly can. So stay tuned to our website. We do have one in-person experience that we are offering now. Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. you can take an outdoor, socially distanced, masked, guided tour of the grounds. We call it Locust Grove from the outside. Since we're not giving tours of the inside of the house anymore, we hope you'll join us for one of these grounds tours as we move into our winter operating procedures. And if you have any other questions, you can always get in touch with me. But we're so pleased that you're with us today. Thank you again, Jim. And we will see you in just a few weeks for our final lecture of 2020. Thanks so much, everyone.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.
Stay well. Bye.